Dr. Matthew Goodwin, känd från GB News, deltog tillsammans med Charlie Weimers från Sverigedemokraterna i en konferens i Europaparlamentet om Europas demografiska kris. Riks tog kontakt med dem för att höra hur Europa kan vända den demografiska utvecklingen. Dr. Matthew Goodwin, you have recently spoken about the demographic crisis in Europe and the UK. What are the most alarming signs of this?
Well, I think if you look at where the UK is going, a few signs. By 2063, white British people will be a minority across the country. By 2079, people born outside of the UK and their immediate children will be a majority. And by the year 2100, 1 in 4 people in the UK and 1 in 3 young people will be following Islam. So what we are seeing is a profound and unprecedented demographic shift. We've never had this before in British history. We've had about 4 million people added to our country in the last few years. This has never happened before. 80% of all immigration into the UK is now coming from outside of Europe. So our country is being radically transformed by people from very different cultures, very different traditions, very different ways of life. And the left will say this is good for the economy, but actually all of the evidence that we now have in the UK says the opposite is true, that this is a net fiscal cost to the UK economy. This is taking more out of the UK economy than it's putting in because it is low wage, low skill, poorly educated migration. It's not to say anything about the migrants themselves. It's just to say as a policy choice, this doesn't really make any sense. That we're bringing people in who are a net fiscal cost to the taxpayer. They are taking more out than they are putting in. So what I'm saying is Europe needs to radically change its position, not just the UK, but Europe. We need to get away from low wage, low skill, culturally incompatible forms of migration from outside of Europe. And we need to start preserving our nation states by having forms of migration that actually contribute to the economy and which are actually compatible with European culture.
You mentioned the expansion of Islam in Europe and the UK in your speech, and also the existence of over 80 Sharia courts. What's your opinion on the influence of Islam? Is it growing, and how can it be countered?
Well, if you look at where the UK is, then we have a fundamental problem. We have 40,000 extremist Islamists that are being monitored by the security services. We have 85 Sharia courts. We have not yet banned the Muslim Brotherhood. We obviously have a problem with Islamism. We have had dozens of Islamist attacks over the last 25 years, most of which have been committed by first or second generation migrants whose parents have often come from Pakistan, from Syria, from Libya. Now, we can either get real about the threat that is facing Western democracies like Sweden and like the UK, or we can continue to ignore it and pretend it's not happening. But I'm of the view that we can actually bring about some radical change. End mass uncontrolled immigration, control the borders, move to a policy of assimilation. You have to assimilate into European culture if you are going to remain in Europe. There is no multiculturalism where different identities and different groups and different values and different ways of life are allowed to cohabit. We have to, I think, move to a policy of assimilation, which is if you come to Europe, if you come to Sweden, if you come to the UK, the expectation, the responsibility on you is to assimilate into that dominant culture, not to bring another culture that supersedes that culture, but is to assimilate into that culture.
The former Prime Minister Boris Johnson from the Conservative Party promised to keep the numbers down. You mentioned that he failed. Why did he do this, and what does the Conservative Party need to do to reform itself?
Well, Boris Johnson betrayed millions of Brexit voters and Conservative voters. He promised in 2019 to lower the overall numbers. He put mass immigration on steroids. He opened the floodgates to nearly 4 million people from outside of Europe. He said that we would get the best of the best, and actually only 15% of the people who came into the UK came in on skilled worker visas. The rest were the relatives of workers, asylum seekers, refugees. And I think fundamentally, Boris Johnson delivered a model of migration that weakened our economy and divided our country. And we are now in the position of having to fix the mess that Boris Johnson and the Conservatives created. And that is why, for example, Nigel Farage and the Reform Party are now polling 35% of the national vote, because the old Conservative Party is dead. It's almost destroyed our country. Nigel Farage and Reform are now going to have to try and fix the mess that was left by the Conservatives, most obviously by regaining control of the country and regaining control of the immigration system.
So, on the topic of Reform UK, what are your opinions on their policies? Will they be sufficient? And on the topic of integration versus remigration, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, on Reform UK, they are basically setting out a realistic response to the crisis. We should leave the European Convention on Human Rights. We should repeal Tony Blair's Human Rights Act. We should detain and deport anybody who arrives in the country illegally. We should ban Muslim Brotherhood. We should focus much more seriously on assimilation, not integration. We should actually say we're no longer going to tolerate people who do not want to tolerate us, and move to a much more muscular approach at assimilation. Why should we live in a country where Pakistani Muslim rape gangs are allowed to operate with impunity? Why should we live in a country where the mass rape of British children is considered to be somehow acceptable, or a price that we are willing to pay for diversity? It is not. It is absolutely unacceptable. Why should we live in a country where 12-year-old girls are told to go home from school on a day that is about celebrating culture because they are wearing the Union Jack flag on their dress? It's absolutely outrageous. So we need to push back very strongly against all of that. And I think fundamentally bring an end to this hyper-liberal, radically woke regime that has taken root in Western systems over the last 20, 30 years. Now, whether you call detaining and deporting illegal migrants remigration, whether you just call it, taking control of the borders, I don't really care. But the current regime is unsustainable because it is undermining the social contract. It is severing the relationship between citizens and their democratically elected politicians in Westminster. And if we carry on going the way we're going in the UK, the result will be a collapse of public trust and a collapse of public support for the social contract.
There have been people sounding the alarm about grooming gangs for about decades, but they faced a lot of criticism and stigma. Why has there been such a stigma around this, and has it been reduced?
I think the stigma comes from the fact that this was a minority group abusing members of the majority, which turns on its head the woke philosophy, which tells us that minorities are good and majorities are bad. And what we have seen is the rape gang scandal really highlighting the extent to which a minority has harassed, intimidated, and abused members of the majority. And it's absolutely outrageous. So I think my view would be anybody who's involved in that scandal who holds dual nationality, who's British and Pakistani, they should be deported from the country. Anybody involved in that scandal should be given immediate life sentences. They should not be released from prison after just a few years. And we need to keep, I think, focusing on the need for a national inquiry into looking at what has happened in towns and cities up and down the UK, where still today, the rape gangs, grooming gangs are operating today. We know they are. And the state and the establishment doesn't seem to be taking this anywhere near as seriously as they would if this was involving the children from minority groups.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matthew Goodwin.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.